Namaste.
Namaste.
So Kristin Neff she's a professor of sociology somewhere around Tennessee or somewhere like that. And she has a little speech impediment that reminds me of this trip I took. So I have to tell the story to get this trip out of my head before I can talk about her work. And it was a vacation I took when I was about 20 years old. And my girlfriend and I at the time decided we would go to the boundary waters of Canada and fish. And the whole thing was a comedy of errors. But at the time she wanted to be some kind of a police officer. And so she was fascinated by the Mounties. And we decided to take a day trip to Winnipeg, which was the closest large city with a Mountie detachment, I guess, whatever you call it, a Mountie off station, you know. And so it's this 3-hour drive, this godforsaken, barren land, until you get to Winnipeg. And we found the Mountie station finally. It was long before GPS, you know, so you had to ask directions. Walk in, and here is this. There are several Mounties in the station. The one desk has possibly the largest overbite I've ever seen in my life on a human being.
Like a horse.
Yeah, kind of like a Simpsons cartoon, only on a live human being. I mean, it was massive. And he said, "Hello." So she says, "Is this the headquarters of the Mounties?" And he said, "No, it's not here." And she said, "What?" She was having a harder time understanding than I was. And she finally gathered that this was not the headquarters, and she said, "Where is it then?" And he said something that sounded like, "I think Regina Saskatchewan." Regina Saskatchewan. And she said, "What?" And this went back and forth, and now the other Mounties are all listening. It's going, "Regina, Regina." And finally she says, in a very loud voice, "Well, where is this vagina anyway?" Which got everybody laughing, which made her more angry.
Oh,
And in my 20-year-old state, I just said, in my humiliation, "I'm very sorry." And just took her by the elbow and said, "We're leaving now." And out of the parking lot she continued, "I don't understand where vagina is." That's right. So anyway, sometimes when I listen to Kristin Neff talk, I think of my trip to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Wow.
There's a very real sense in which it's impossible for me to feel compassionate towards you if I cannot feel compassionate toward myself. It's impossible for me, moreover, to love you if I don't love myself. And even more importantly, if I'm in that place, the things that I don't like about myself, that you may share with me, common qualities and traits, that I have blinded myself to within myself, I will see in you and detest. It's why there's no person more obnoxious than a reformed anything. Fill in the blank. Reformed smokers are absolutely ballistic about people that smoke because they haven't yet made peace with the fact that they used to smoke. Former members of a particular religious tradition struggle with people who are still in that tradition because they haven't made peace with the fact that they were there. They haven't reconciled within themselves, how could I have been there? What was I thinking? And it's that we aren't charitable enough with ourselves to see that we develop and progress and evolve over time. If somebody said to us, "Aren't you humiliated that you used to ride a tricycle?" We would say we would have that reaction. We'd say, well, of course not, because it was developmentally appropriate at a certain age to ride a tricycle.
You saw me yesterday?
That's right. Unless you're on one of those really big ones. And then if you have a problem with that, it's probably because you haven't made peace with riding the little one.
Yeah, I had a tricycle a couple of years ago.
Did you?
It was bigger though,
Well, that's good.
big enough to.
Better than, if you have the one with the wheels that are like this and you just raise the seat and the handlebars up and up, it starts to look a little silly. But we see it in ourselves, maybe sometimes, as individuals. And it's a really interesting exercise to ask ourselves, why does that person get under my skin the way they do? And it's not always the case that there's something in them that reminds us of something in ourselves that we don't like to look at. I mean, let's face it, there are people in the world who are having bad days and are pretty rude and abrupt, and they will get under our skin. And so we shouldn't be in that place where we start to believe that everybody who we struggle with represents to us some part of ourselves. Yeah. But there is a sense in which, until we can integrate those parts of ourselves, we're never going to be able to love ourselves. And we truly cannot then extend compassion to others. And if you doubt that, there was a huge earthquake in Nepal yesterday, in the 7.6 range, I think. 2 aftershocks in the high 6s. And what's the lead in the news? The people that were in the base camp at Mount Everest.
What?
Yeah, oh yeah. Because there was an avalanche.
That's a shame too, but.
Yeah, well, it's a shame too, but after all, it represents about 37 people. Never mind that there's more than 2,000 casualties. Deaths, casualties, real casualties. I mean, full-blown casualties.
Where's Nepal?
Nepal is north of China,
Okay.
the northwestern border of China. One of the consequences to me for living next to a body of water that's always been east, I mean, because thankfully Lake Michigan doesn't move. But my directional references, if there's no water around, I have to stop and think. And if the water is on the west side of where I am, I'm completely
Very
lost.
confused.
Yes, because it's east. That's what. And then I lived, on the Atlantic Ocean, which was to the east, so that was okay. But God forbid I ever land somewhere where the water's to the west. And you have more than 2,000 people dead, but they don't look like us. They don't act like us. They're in another part of the world, but those people that were at the base of the Himalayan, or the base of Everest, because they're all in the Himalayas, the people who were at the base of Everest were well-to-do white people who flew there to climb the mountain. So we're very worried about that. Never mind the people who are living in ancient buildings, and if you don't like the way the building you live in is constructed, think of this. At least it's not a building made of mud, straw, and dung water. And needless to say, those buildings don't really withstand earthquakes very well. Your dung tends to crack if you shake it hard enough. But it's that the whole notion of xenophobia, the idea that I'm afraid of the other, I'm afraid of the foreigner and the outsider, is, I believe, rooted in the fact that I haven't even developed compassion for myself. And so I can't extend compassion easily to people who look like me and who are from cultural circumstances and situations that I'm familiar with. And now you're going to ask me to extend compassion towards somebody whose living situation is so different than mine that I can't even conceive of. And that's essentially what Kristin Neff has found. And she's become involved with the groups of scientists who are studying things like compassion, altruism, and studying it in a way that looks at brain structure and the areas of our brain that light up and work when we're experiencing these states. So why does that matter in terms of the Good Shepherd? Well, this is exactly the Good Shepherd. Because even though none of us have thank God. In this part of the world anyway. Someone who owns us and needs to look over us. The problem with the hireling in this story is that he doesn't identify with the sheep he's supposed to watch. It's a job. There's no real compassion. It's a goods for services exchange, or a cash for services exchange. And the way that sheepfolds were set up, still today even in this part of the world, but back in biblical times, is that you had sort of a hill, a mound would be a better description. And the mound then was dug out underneath. So they put a little door in the mound and dig out underneath. And then there would be a path around the mound and a way to get up on top of it. A path up there too. And they would do their best to fence off this area. And so what happened was the sheep, because they're rather sensitive to climate change, if the weather got harsh or if it was at night, they went into that part they dug out under the mound and slept down there. But they came out and walked around the mound during the day for exercise and things. And the shepherd, or the hired person who was taking the job of shepherd, basically stood on top of the mound so that they could see a pretty decent distance and tell if there was anything coming that was going to be of danger to the sheep. And if there was, they'd try and shepherd a verb? I don't know, they'd shepherd them in under the mound, or they'd get them under the mound where they'd be safe. But, of course, if I'm more concerned with my own skin than the job I have to do with the sheep that are there, and I think the wolf might decide that I'm looking tastier than the sheep, I'm not going to hang around, I'm going to leave. And for the first time in the Judeo-Christian experience with Jesus, you start to see somebody saying, no, no, no. Everybody matters to me. And the first thing we do, because we don't like ourselves very much, is start picking out the people that couldn't possibly matter to Jesus. It doesn't matter to us that he says, I have other sheep that don't belong to this sheep pen. We're going to ferret them out. Because we're not so sure that we're okay. And the only way that we can start to feel that maybe we're going to be okay, and that somebody else might care about us, or that a divine being might care about us, is if we can identify those people who we're pretty sure nobody would care about, and prove to ourselves that at least we aren't that bad. Sure, I may burn buildings down for a living, but I've never burned down an orphanage. And so it's those people that burn down orphanages that Jesus doesn't care about. And it will never stop until we start to get to the place where we say, I'm okay. Now there's a cute little phraseology that's going around now that says, I'm not okay and you're not okay and that's okay. And yeah, I think that can be good in certain contexts, but I don't think that takes away that there's this part of me that I'm trying to disown, what Jung would have called a shadow. And as long as I'm trying to disown it, it's going to bother me when I see it in somebody else. So until I can start to see that there's things about me both that I'm going to like and not like, and even things that I could care less about, that I'm going to be in the middle of. And that's okay, that's what it is to be a human being. And that's what it is for everybody else too. And so I can stop this game where I have to put others in a lower place in order to feel better about myself. Mm-hmm. But I can't get there unless I decide I'm okay. There you have wars. There you have discrimination of every kind. There you have the kind of thought process that says, we will not tolerate human rights abuses in certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
But in other parts of the world, we'll look the other way.
Especially if there's oil.
Yes, if there's oil, human rights abuses are a terrible thing. If there's no natural resources, well then, we can't get involved there because it's not to our economic advantage. And you can't understand any great religious teacher until you come to understand that what they're advocating is a great upheaval of the status quo. A change that, at least on the surface, will cost everybody something. And that makes us run away because we don't realize that the status quo is costing everybody something. There's another part of that reality we don't want to look at. We don't look at our own human rights abuses, which is, but we do selectively look at other people's. And the reason we can't honestly look at everybody's is because then we'd see the places where we don't act. And if you try and come into something like this and fix it in one step, it's hugely overwhelming. It's not even possible. And that's why I would suggest that the way to start developing compassion for ourselves, this is a little counterintuitive, but it's that we start acting with compassion toward the people closest to us. Not even ourselves, but the people closest to us. Who do I care most about in this world? And if the answer is me, then you have to pick the person you care about second most. And what happens, strangely enough, for reasons that I don't quite understand, is that if I start acting with compassion toward that person, if I start really trying to understand their situation, not to resolve it, not to rescue them from it, but to be there for them, then I get in this compassionate habit, and it starts to impact me. Very often it's like that video that's floating around, I don't know if you've seen it on social media, where there's a woman and you see her face like this. And she starts talking about, I've just got so much pressure. I don't know, it's just building all the time and it seems like it's right on top of me. And they pull back and there's a nail coming out of the middle of her forehead. Mm-hmm. And she's sitting on this couch and there's a man sitting on the couch too, obviously her boyfriend or her husband or something. And he says, I think the problem's that nail that you've got to. And she says, you always do this. You always try to fix it. When what I really need is somebody to listen to me. And as he says, I'm not trying to fix it, I just really think that if we took that nail out. And there's this back and forth where finally, in the end, nothing is resolved. Compassion actually says, all right, if you don't want me to pull the nail out, I will at least listen to you and offer you what you need. And put aside my need to extract that nail. Although maybe rather than, this is perfect. Maybe rather than extract that nail, what you really need is a mirror. See the nail for yourself. And maybe that's how we most respond with compassion. You know, there's a real tendency among human beings to enter into relationship looking for what we can get for ourselves. And it's normal and it's natural, but as you might imagine, it's not the best thing for relationship. Real compassionate relationship might just say that I can show you, I can become a mirror for you, and reflect back to you those good, strong, wonderful things in yourself, that I can show you that you're important to me. By the way I listen and behave toward you. Not by buttering you up, but by real action that says, I'm here for you and you mean something to me. That's compassion. It's different from pity. It reflects a value. And if we are able to be compassionate towards enough people, we might start to see that, gee, we're pretty compassionate people. And then maybe we won't have to look at ourselves like some defective piece of merchandise hoping nobody finds out the secret. Mm-hmm. And as we do it locally and get better at it locally, we can start to expand it. No difficult problem was ever solved overnight. But it sure isn't solved either by saying, here comes the wolf. I better get to running. Amen.